when the recording starts. All right. Hello and welcome to those joining us on Zoom and live on Facebook to Dialogue Firesides on May 16th, 2021. I am Taylor Petrie, conducting today on behalf of the Dialogue Foundation Board. Board members Michael Austin, Chris Kimball, Rebecca DeSchweinitz, and Dalen Namaseku are here as part of our group today. More than 50 years of dialogue content, articles, essays, poetry, and art is available online at dialoguejournal.com. These Dialogue Fireside sessions are posted on the Dialogue Journal YouTube channel and our podcast feed in your favorite podcast app and at dialoguejournal.com/podcasts. We're so grateful for our dedicated audience, and if you're enjoying these events, please consider supporting Dialogue by subscribing or donating at dialoguejournal.com/subscribe. Tonight, we're pleased to hear from Marlena Wilding. Her remarks today are titled Art, the Spiritual Language of the Soul. Marlena Wilding is a mixed media artist who currently lives and works in Seattle, Washington with her husband and 2 children. Born and raised in Utah County in the LDS faith in one of the few Black families in the state, Marlena brings a unique perspective to her work. She received a BA at Brigham Young University in visual arts. She creates layered works portrayed both physically and metaphorically. Marlena has had the privilege to be featured and work alongside Kirk Richards and is currently working on a collaborative project with Kirk and other amazing artists. She has had her work featured in various galleries and art publications in the United States and the UK. She's also trained as a teacher, specializing in art education and art therapy. She's taught at-risk youth to channel their pain, joy, and experience into art to bring healing and self-love, while also pursuing a master's degree in special education at Weber State University. Her art is featured in the spring 2021 issue of Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, and is including the powerful cover image that is featured here on the screen. After Marlena's remarks, we'll be opening up for a Q&A. Our audience may submit comments in the chat, and I will help to moderate those comments along with the other panelists here. We'll have an invocation by Isha Lehman, who is an artist based in Provo, Utah. She is currently in Brigham Young University's Studio Art BFA program with minors in sociology and Africana studies. Her work is often research-based, grappling with the complexities of identity in race, ethnicity, gender, and spirituality. We'll then move immediately to our main presentation. Aisha.
Dear God, we're so grateful that we have the opportunity to hear from Marlena today, that we get to learn from her, her experiences, her creative process, and how it all ties to her spirituality. And we're grateful that we can meet together as a community and learn from one another. We pray that we will have a spirit with us, that we'll each be inspired to know how we can move forward in our own personal lives. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Okay, so I'm good to go, I'm assuming. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. So I have a little bit of a PowerPoint. So I'll get that going right now. And that. Okay, so the topic or what I'm sharing is kind of talking about how art has kind of been a way that has really helped me. So Art, the Spiritual Language of the Soul is kind of the title. And so I wanted to talk about what is art, first of all. And I believe art can be defined as any creative situation, aesthetic, or communicative with emotional purposes. And that's kind of how I view art, which is an amazing thing. And I also see art as communication. And throughout history, people have used art to communicate without relying on words. Art can express political ideas, reinforce religion, and hold on, I can't read that one part, or convey deeply personal thoughts. And so I've used art a lot to help with this and for me. And I also have felt very much that Jesus used short stories, right? And I saw a lot of his short stories as poetry. And I love the parables. They have helped me so much, when you think of the Good Samaritan, the parable of the mustard seeds, as you can see, there's so many more parables that Christ has used. And I think that's such a powerful thing that, he has done. And why did Christ use parables? In my opinion, and I'm sure others share this as well, but it's interesting when someone shares a story with you about an idea. I think, when someone shares a story with you, one, they're not necessarily telling you what you should do per se, but they're kind of sharing an idea, and those who get the idea will be able to process that and move on and use that. But those who don't get the idea, then it's okay. There's no judgment. There's still love. It's unconditional. It's that unconditional love. It's a way to share something without being like, oh, okay, so if you don't understand the story, it's okay. One day you will, and if you don't, it's fine. But those who understand it will be able to use that moving forward. So kind of hold that on the back burner, because now I'm going to kind of go into the intro into my work. So ever since I was a little girl, I always wanted to be an artist. That's the only thing I ever wanted to do. Well, and be a singer, that was another thing. But these are like the first drawings that I could find that I've ever done. And I believe this was when I was 3rd grade or 2nd grade, I can't remember. But I was really obsessed with artwork. With drawing, with painting. I was into anime. Yeah, I was one of those kids. But just to show you I want to kind of show you the progression, mainly because as I go further into my current work, a lot of my work that I love to do currently is symbolic, and I'll kind of go into that later. This is my middle school artwork, my teens. This is kind of the things that I was working on. But yeah, I was so in love with art. I always used it in so many ways, and I like to explore different techniques. And as you can see right here. And then this is my some of the high school portraits that I did. And as you can see, I'll just point that out. I mean, obviously, as you can see, there's not too much diversity here. Almost everywhere any school that I went to, I was either one of the few Black kids or the only Black kid in my class. But these were some really great friends of mine that I was able to model. And as you can see, there's some, kind of emotion is in some of these paintings. I like to kind of share that in my work. So here's some of my high school work. And then here are some of my drawings that I kind of explored in college. These were kind of quick sketches that I've done just to kind of share, there's different techniques that I like to explore, and some drawings that I think were just fun to do. And then I found watercolor, one of my favorite painting techniques I love to use. And if anyone knows some of my work that I do now, they'll see that I like to use a lot of those different, techniques, or what is the word? Like mom brain. You get what I mean. I like to use different painting modalities or things within my work. But these are just kind of some of the, I guess what I'm doing is showing you guys I can draw. And I can paint. But moving on. So I just wanted to share, and I kind of shared this a little bit, but art allows me to connect with others on different levels, share a different perspective, and, process emotions I'm going through and to heal. Art really helped me, and I believe art does that for a lot of people. And when I think of art, I mean, a lot of people dance, they sing, they write, meditation, prayer, even sports. There's a lot of ways to process emotions and to heal, and a lot of people use different things. And for me, art has been one of those. So this is one of my first pieces that I did when I graduated from BYU. I'm currently, at this moment, I actually worked as you guys heard before, but I was an art teacher at a facility for at-risk youth. And this piece was inspired by my students. I was so amazed by them. And I think a lot of this work kind of tying into, you know, wanting to connect with others on different levels and also sharing a different perspective. This series is based on a group of work that I titled The Worth of Souls. I have not finished it. At the end, I wanted to do like 100 portraits, but I only got to like 5 because been busy, have 2 kids. But this was kind of for my students. A lot of them, I saw them as such beautiful, you know, just amazing individuals. And so I kind of was inspired by them. So I've made a lot of art to kind of share perspective or help see people in different ways. This Eve piece I made as well, which with a lot of my work, I mean, yes, it's a portrait, you know, it's a woman, but I like to put a lot of symbols in there at points. And actually, when I made this piece, I was kind of, you know, kind of commenting on wet nurses and kind of things that have gone in with my my heritage and, you know, African-American heritage within, just kind of commenting on that a little bit and just processing certain things. And the cool thing about this piece actually is I actually was not finished with it. I had painted this within like 6 hours, and I had a show because I tend to procrastinate sometimes, and I had a show the next day, and I priced it at a price that I was thinking, oh, no one's gonna buy that. And then I put it out there and it was bought immediately. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. On pieces that I didn't spend that much time on that people wanted to buy my work. But now I want to get into nitty gritty. This is like the real stuff here. Process emotions to heal. And this is where I feel art has been most beneficial for me. As you kind of seen before my previous work, I like to surprise people. I mean, I don't like to necessarily stay in one lane, but I kind of like to explore different areas. I kind of like to make work that's more on the surface. I kind of like to make work that's, you know, really deep within. And then I like to make work in between. But going back to why I talked about the parables, because that has taught me so much. I learned to paint using symbols, and the parables taught me that, especially because I was the only, at the time, it's changed now, but at the time, I was the only Black art student at BYU. I was the only one. And at that time, I was discovering a lot of things about myself. I was learning about my, you know, the history of my ancestors for the first time, mind you. I mean, I learned little bits and pieces here and there, but not a lot of the nitty gritty. So I was going through a lot. And this is kind of how I felt. This picture literally is how I felt. I learned really early on how to kind of appear as happy and, you know, just to kind of I felt it. I didn't feel safe, as you can see what I wrote. I didn't really feel safe to express any negative emotions because of certain stereotypes that I heard often, especially, you know, being angry. But to be honest, I was very angry. I was very angry, and art can help me process that anger. But this is literally, just to make it a light, this is like literally how I felt, where I would smile, but it was just also very angry. And so I learned that if I made work, one, I learned that in order for, let's see, how can I say this? If I wanted to share an idea or even something that I'm feeling, I realized that I had to find a way to make it symbolic so that others could kind of, it was kind of, people could look at it and digest it in the way that they could, if that makes sense. It was on their terms in a way. So if someone didn't understand, like there's many people who see this piece, they're like, oh, that's a really cool pattern. And I named it pattern for a specific reason, because for those who don't know what it is, they can just be like, oh, that's such a lovely pattern and move on. You know, they could get something out of it. But somebody who knew or has seen the diagram of the slave ship, they would understand, oh, whoa, those are how the bodies were labeled in the slave ship. And then if someone also understood, you know, the type of material I decided to paint it on, they'd be like, oh, she painted on cargo paper. And then there's kind of more to the story. And so that's kind of what I meant earlier, where I like to paint in layers, and I like to use symbolism for my work. But then at the same time, everybody can kind of get something from it, you know, or just move on if it doesn't resonate. But this is kind of how I was able to make work when I'm being the only Black student in my classes, and still feel like it could be digested. Not saying it was necessarily the way that I always, you know, wanted it to be, but I also, you know, felt inspired by, like I said, the parables. Another piece, the past, I mean, yes, this one might be a little bit more, oh, it's a noose, but, you know, I named it the past for a reason. So it would be like, oh, that's interesting. But to kind of express this piece of artwork, I don't know if you can see, but there is a fingerprint in it. And just, I kind of talked about, like, this piece kind of was how oftentimes when it comes to your heritage, we are all affected by certain things, and some things haven't been healed yet. And just how, you know, I have never experienced slavery, but I have experienced some other things, and I still feel like there's this tie to that. I mean, since then I've gotten a lot of healing from that, but just, that's kind of the comment on this piece. I mean, there's more to that, but that's kind of what I'll share at this point. And this piece called Land of the, this is another piece. If someone looks at it, they're like, oh, it's very abstract. That's, you know, that's interesting. But there's a lot of symbolism within this piece. And that's just kind of how I learned to be able, and it's, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I do feel it was unfortunate that I didn't feel safe to kind of, you know, express in different ways. But at the same time, I do love symbolism. I do love the idea of that. And so with this piece, there's a lot to this piece. And I think this piece is actually in the Church Museum right now, so you can go and see that one. And if you want to hear more about this piece, we can talk about it later, but I'll move on. There's another piece, Oh Man. I like to use a lot of symbolism and just kind of explore different things. I'm curious what I often don't share sometimes what pieces are about, because I'm curious what people think, because I also like people coming up with their, you know, connecting on their own way, and kind of coming up with their own ideas as to what certain things mean. But when I made this piece, I was kind of, you know, frustrated about certain ideas, and, you know, being a woman and what that means, and how it's kind of portrayed, and how it's how women aren't always represented. And again, I can talk about some of those things later, because these are kind of charged. But then there's this piece. This is probably one of the pieces that had a lot in for me. And unfortunately, this piece, after I made this piece, I haven't really made any art for years, because I mean, if you know the story as to what happened with this piece, you'll know why. But I just didn't have, there wasn't a lot of feedback, you know. And at that time, I wasn't the most confident. So when someone you really respect, you know, says something about a piece, you know, sometimes it's hard to listen to yourself, and sometimes you rely on others' opinions. But again, with this piece, there's a reason why I untitled it, because if I titled, you know, kind of more of what it was saying, then it kind of didn't allow that mystery, didn't really allow for people to kind of come and figure things on their own terms. So anyway, that's kind of where, you know, talking about my work and the importance to me for using symbolism. But then as I have gone through the years, I worked on a lot of self-love, and I realized that in order for me to heal, that I needed to kind of, you know, as I kind of was talking about earlier, anger was the emotion, one of the main emotions I had a really hard time letting myself feel. And I didn't understand the point of anger, but I was very angry about, you know, certain things. And I realized in order for me to heal, I needed to listen to that anger and to, and, you know, I think subconsciously I already did that, as you saw in those other pieces, where I kind of allowed my, you know, those feelings to come out in my artwork within the patterns, past and untitled. But the beautiful thing about, you know, going towards is that it's like you're acknowledging it, and then you can kind of let it go, you know. Like I was saying, you know, feeling my art allows me to feel anger, my pain, and then allows me to let it go. And I kind of like to relate this to the Chinese finger trap. I think sometimes when we have quote unquote negative emotions, we try to avoid those things, but the best way to you know, come back into that love and to let go of that fear is to actually go towards it. And I think of like a Chinese finger trap, you know, in order to get out of that trap, you have to put the two fingers together. You gotta like let yourself be angry. And then when you acknowledge that it's real, then it will go away. And that has been such a healing thing that I learned. And I think even when it comes to certain issues that, you know, I think the world is dealing with, is it's so important to acknowledge things, look at it, and then people can let it go, you know? But the unfortunate thing is people avoid so many painful things because they don't want to look at it and acknowledge that it's real. Anyway, that's another thing. But after I've kind of gone through the self-healing, because I made this piece called So. That was the original title anyway. But, you know, adding, Patterns of America is kind of more about this piece. But this particular piece, I had a lot of struggles with certain things. And the one thing about art for me is that it allowed me to look at some things, you know, kind of look at my frustrations, my anger, transform it into something beautiful, in my opinion, and then let it go. But then at the same time, for other people to get something from it, you know, that's kind of how I've been able to use that anger that I feel and kind of be able to move on myself, because I was so bogged down by certain things, and I wanted to be happy, and I wanted to have self-love and to kind of heal a lot of that ancestral pain. And so, you know, in this particular piece, it was really important for me, you know, to do it, to acknowledge my feelings about certain things, be vulnerable, share it. And the cool thing is there's other people that felt similarly, and then I could let it go. And then in the process, like I said, you know, others could see my perspective, or they could relate to it in some way, and that could help, you know, for healing. I guess that's kind of the end of the slideshow, but I kind of alluded to this, but after I did that, and I guess I'll stop sharing, I'll show my face. But after I did, let's see, can you see my face? Let's do, how do I not share anymore?
You're not sharing now, you're fine.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, I'm a mom. Anyway, so I just kind of forgot what I was talking about. I had one of those moments. What was I talking about? I totally forgot what I was talking about. I was like on a roll. What was I talking about?
I think you were talking about Untitled. You said after you shared that piece.
Oh, thank you. After I did that piece, I haven't made art for 4 years. And then I kind of had to go through a lot of healing and letting my voice be heard, because I didn't feel, it was hard. I'm not gonna lie, it was hard sharing some of those works and not really having a lot of others who could kind of relate to my pieces. And then it was cool when I almost threw Untitled away, by the way, after I had that critique. It was kind of locked away, and I brought it out and shared it, and it was just amazing, the response from others. And it's just been an amazing experience. And so, to be honest, besides some of my sketches, as you can see that I showed you, I have about 10 pieces of art to my name. I have not made a lot of work, and so now I have a lot more projects that I'm making more of, and and I feel better about sharing my experiences, and also not always on race, just like I said before, like I there's other things that I want to share. And I think the funnest thing in my art, I love to surprise people, because people like to be like, oh, Marlena, you do this kind of art, and I'm like, really, do I? I'm gonna show you something else. So I think we're all multidimensional. We all have different things about us, and that's something about art. And just to share for those who are interested in being artists or interested in expressing themselves, I think the best thing you can do is to be vulnerable and share what you have to share. I mean, I think I love it when people can feel something when they see my work. But I just, going back, to art is an amazing thing, and again, like I said earlier, art is so many different facets. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to share, and I would love to see what questions we have.
Do you want to do the music piece, Marlena?
Oh yes, I forgot. Oh yes. So what I'll be sharing is this piece I actually did. I think back when I shared it at BYU. Again, mind you, only Black student in the classroom, but this piece was really important to me, and it kind of because I like I said, I'm a mixed media artist, so I like to use so many different medias to kind of share certain things. So what you'll be hearing is my piece called Swept Under the Rug. And so I hope you enjoy.
Every 3 years, an ancient ritual takes place here. Every 3 years, ritual takes place here. Every 3 years, an ancient
He is the creator and sustainer of all the worlds, whether those worlds are known or unknown to mankind.
Marlena, thank you for this. This has been absolutely riveting and very enthusiastic questions that are already kind of been piling up here. We're going to let people take a few minutes to continue to ask questions, but I think that a lot of people are very curious. The suspense has sort of been built up about the experience behind the Untitled, the reaction to it. And it may be a very sensitive story, and so if you're not comfortable sharing it, that's fine. We want to respect that. But a number of people have asked if you wouldn't mind expanding on that.
So Untitled, yes, why I made that piece. So at that time, I was in the UK. I was learning more about the slave trade, and in fact, all of those pieces that you saw were all in a series that I did that all when I was in the UK at that time. But that piece, it's interesting because I made that in 2013. And that was before, you know, obviously from my experience, there's a lot of other things that have happened, but before more people saw things publicly when it comes to George Floyd and like other things that have happened, Floyd, wow. So that piece. So when it comes to like, what should I share about that? So I have family who have been in the system, and oddly enough, those who are also experienced similar things than my family did not experience the same things as my family. They were able to, you know, continue on in life, and so, and I also have brothers. It's a different experience than mine, you know, being a Black woman in Utah, but my brothers all had very interesting experiences and had to learn, you know, I think that picture that I showed, but they had to learn how to not be a threat. And with that piece, you know, the thing is that when there's so much generational trauma, it's like, I think of it like this. It's like when you have flies in a jar, right? You close a jar, you know, people are trying to get out, you know, they're trying to get out, but then over time they stop trying to get out, and then the jar's open, and then they just stay in the jar. And that's kind of what I think of when I think of this idea, because, you know, we are the masters of our ships, but at the same time, the system that we live under doesn't always allow for people to continue their lives. They still have choices, but doesn't always guarantee that certain things aren't going to happen to you. I mean, you get to choose how you're going to handle that. And so that's kind of a part of narrative on that piece. And I mean, when it comes to the colors I chose, even the placement of certain things, but I also wanted to leave some mystery so that people could kind of come on their own conclusion, because that's really important with my work. I like to share, you know, have something out there, and then, you know, letting people process on their own what they can process and what, you know, they're ready to process. So yeah, I hope that that's kind of what when it comes to that piece. Yeah, so.
Andy, our art editor, is asking if she can share the story of why she chose the piece for the dialogue cover as well. Do you mind if she tells? She'll just share it in the chat. So yeah, thank you, Andy. Yeah. So we'll see if there are other questions from the panelists or others that want to jump in here. I've got a million myself, but I'll let others kind of weigh in here.
So I've been thinking about the titles of some of your pieces, the past and so, and this idea of intergenerational trauma coming up too. And it seems to fit so well with some of these topics that we talk about in Latter-day Saint, in the Latter-day Saint context, right? So family history, and we tend to have kind of warm, fuzzy feelings when we talk and think about that. But I'm really struck by kind of this confrontation of what family history and reckoning with the past, really demands of us in a faith community that that takes on the pain of others, right? Who mourn, folks who are supposed to mourn with those who mourn, right? And so I'm wondering about kind of how you and I'm struck too by your thinking about how your work, especially as a BYU student, was being received, and how could you communicate something of this depth of experience and perspective in a way that begins to kind of let people know about these deeper truths. So I just would love to hear you kind of talk more about that and kind of choices and navigating and all that.
Yeah. So you're, and is there like a specific question? Because I'm like, okay.
Not really.
Well, I guess, so one thing is I was born and raised in Utah. So one thing I learned how to do I learned how to appear, and I'm like, what's the language when I use this? Again, just not as a threat. I think I've heard oftentimes people, that throwing around the angry Black woman, though I was angry. I never wanted to appear angry, though I was angry. But I learned how to code switch. I learned how to talk in certain ways that would make people feel comfortable, because unfortunately at the time, a lot of the people that I knew, the only experiences or things that they saw of Black people were movies or rap music, and they didn't, and that's saying something because there's so much more, but that's what I would often hear. And so growing up, I learned how, and to be honest, like, it's unfortunate because in a way, I wasn't, like, I didn't feel safe at times, to be honest, if that makes sense. And that's something that's changing now, that has changed. But so when it came to these pieces, because I had that knowledge, I knew kind of how to share my work in ways that could be digested by those around me without compromising my thoughts and ideas, because I didn't want to be, I didn't want to share work that was like, rainbows and lollipops, but at the same time, I wanted to be able to be digested. I understand that when it comes to conversation, if you go someone and say you're wrong, that person's not really going to listen to you. But if you say something like, hey, I want to share this I thought with you, this idea, then people are more apt to kind of hear you out. And so that's kind of how, and again, like, honestly, growing up, the parables were really a way for me to kind of learn how to do that. I was like, oh, that's interesting that he's talking about, this idea, but he's kind of talking about something else. And so that's kind of where I got that idea from. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I, a lot of times I know in African-American history and poetry, there's, we wear the mask, that idea of masking, but I really love the way that thinking about this in terms of parables, right? Because you're telling the truth, you're telling your truth, you're telling the truth. And it's just, some are going to get it and be able to kind of move to the next level. But it's also, as you said, like, it's full of this grace, right? They can still stay in love. And is a way to express that truth in that also kind of fosters unity and the possibility of rising to the next level, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing too is like most of my friends, actually all of my friends, well, not all, I did have, so grateful. I had a couple of Black friends who were amazing. I'm grateful that we were able to, you know, connect, but most of my friends are white. And I also, even though there were some hurtful things I experienced, I loved them and I knew they loved me on a level, you know? And so I think because of that experience, that's kind of, that was a way for me to kind of be like, here, I kind of want to, I'm going to bring this open, but, you know, I'm going to do it in a way that you can digest, you know, and that's kind of why I did what I did. I think, you know, it's fascinating that I think about it, about, you know, how I grew up and what I learned. And I think because of my experience is why my art is the way that it is. I mean, as you guys could see earlier, I mean, I can draw. I kind of wanted to share that, like I can draw, but I don't like to make art just to make art. You know, for me, it's a way for me, it's so much more to me. It's a way for me to heal, and it's a way for, I like connection. And when someone looks at my artwork and they can feel something, I'm like, yes, you know, or the, you know, that's when I'm like, yeah, that's what I want, you know, so.
Got another question here in the chat that I'll just read because it's a really well stated question here. When I saw Untitled for the first time, I was overwhelmed because it looked like a Black man hanging. The tilt of the head was just enough to make it look like the body was broken. I wasn't prepared for how horrified I felt. Seeing the image without context made the wounds of racism overwhelming to me. As a person of color, it was so visceral and I couldn't get it out of my mind. I needed your words to help me bring this image into perspective. How do you help your viewer to not feel re-victimized and bring it around to a place of healing?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I think oftentimes when I made my work, it was kind of geared towards those who didn't understand, not necessarily for those who did. But because the thing is that it's like when it comes to the context of the work, it's fascinating because what you said, that was not necessarily my intention at all. I think that's fascinating. That's what you saw when you saw the piece, because it was more so the white was over his mouth. But I think when it comes to pieces like that, you know, I would love to do more conversations, because when it comes to pieces like this that are, I think it's better to talk about those things than to just write about it, because sometimes words aren't enough communication to express what is going on here, you know? And I hope that answers your question, because honestly, when I think of that work at the time, I was the only Black art student. And so I knew that if I shared something like this, you know, I knew that for my fellow colleagues, that they didn't quite have that depth of that piece. And so for them, when they saw it, it wouldn't be as traumatic for them. But it was something that I think was important for them to see the severity of what was going on, to maybe look at the history, because unfortunately, a lot of people don't even know the history. And so that was kind of the point of my piece. And so, but yeah, I totally get that. That totally makes sense. Yeah, I get that, because it's a serious thing. So thank you for sharing that with me. Yeah.
Marlena, when I think back to 2013, I think that was around the time of Trayvon. Maybe it was just right before Ferguson. So it's kind of at the very beginnings, as you mentioned, of the Black Lives Matter movement, where these kinds of a sort of reemergence of an activism around these kinds of questions was happening. You've mentioned a number of times you were the only Black student in the art program there. You were in the UK at the time of some of these things. But at the same time, you seem to be connected and learning about these things, and that's the source of a lot of the kind of emotional reaction that you were having to it.
Mhm.
What were the places that you were going, or where were you finding community, or finding this history, or being able to connect to it during that time period where there weren't necessarily natural people around you to be having those conversations with? Where were you connecting it? Where were you learning it from? Where were you kind of finding your community?
Yeah, so for me, like a lot of it, one, my parents did teach me what they could. And so I did have some knowledge, but at the time of that piece, I think it was before, from my remembering, because I made that piece in response to learning about the slave trade. It was not in response to Trayvon at that time. And I believe that this happened right recently before that experience, which I think is interesting in and of itself, because it was definitely not a response to that, because when that did happen, it definitely affected me on some level. Oh my goodness, I totally lost my train of thought. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Well, you started the answer with maybe your parents, or I was just saying, like, where did you find a community, or where were you learning?
Right. Yeah. So at that time, I learned, like, I literally would go. I went to the museum when I was in the UK. That was the beginning of it, and I learned about certain things. And then I was so fortunate at the time to be a part of the civil rights this group at BYU, where they took students, me and one of my best friends were able to be a part of the civil rights, or I can't remember, it was like African American history of civil rights. We were able to learn a lot of things that we never were able to learn. And so they took us, we went to Alabama. I learned about all these things, and it basically kind of like lit a fire within me, because I didn't know any of this. I mean, I did know a little bit. I knew the surfacey things. So for me, that being a part of my, lineage, I didn't really know the nitty gritty. I didn't know a lot of, like, obviously what's taught in school. Yes, I knew that. But as far as the things that I'm just gonna assume a lot of people here don't know, I didn't know. And that was kind of the start of my feelings towards my work, and just, but oddly enough, to be honest though, that I think the interesting thing is when I made all those pieces, patterns, Untitled, Land of, that was all when I was in the UK, before I had gone on my civil rights trip. So that was more of just, when I was learning about the slave, and I was frustrated because of learning about, the UK and how they dealt with it, and then how the US handled it. And that's kind of was my response when it came to that. And so, I think at the time though, when all those things were happening, I was feeling it. And I think it's interesting sometimes when you allow yourself, like the title, art, the spiritual language of the soul. I definitely was intuitive, and I just kind of went with the flow. And I think it's interesting, one, that I made that piece and what happened in America, and then, other pieces that seem to apply. So I hope that answers your question, but yeah.
Marlena, I have a question, I guess, relating several of the questions in the chat, and also my reaction.
Yeah.
There's a kind of tension in what you've presented between me wanting to know more about what are you saying, what's in this piece of work, and you saying, I don't want to tell you, I don't want to put the words to it, and I want your reaction. And a number of the questions in the chat are, tell us more. But part of what you're doing right here is what I want. Now I'll go to me personally. That is, I don't actually want you to tell me in words, in a didactic kind of lecture way, this is what I'm saying. But this is the setting. This is what was happening in my life when I made this piece. This is the paper I used. These colors are relevant because they came from, notice the white is across his mouth. That adds so much to me. And that's something, it's a little different than, these are the words this is the message, but notice this is important. This is where it came from. That's a richness that I'm really valuing. And it's a kind of response to the questions people are asking. Tell us more about this work. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I will. I guess I'll start. Let me start with pattern. And first off, before I even begin, I think sometimes when I make my work, it's really kind of intuitive. I didn't always think necessarily that, oh, I'm gonna do this and this is what's gonna mean. It was kind of like me trusting myself and just letting my emotion just take over, if that makes sense. I didn't always research or think, okay, if I use this color, this is why, for instance, let me explain. Untitled, that piece. In the beginning, when I saw that piece, that photograph, that image, there was something on his mouth. And so what I did was like, oh, I don't want that there. And I used the paint, the white. And I found that fascinating. And it just kind of all came together. So I have to be honest, some of those things that I did was kind of intuitive. I didn't necessarily go out and think, oh, I need to use white paint and this is gonna mean this. It was also just like, this is how I feel. This is what works. And then when I look back at it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is exactly how, does that make sense? So some of my pieces kind of was intuitive. I didn't necessarily always, and those were my best pieces, I feel, when I just let myself make something. Just let myself be vulnerable and make something. So with pattern, like when it came to the prints though, those ones are more intentional because I made the print, I processed it, the material I used. But for my print per se, I was just riveted when I learned about the slave trade, because I actually didn't understand like how the bodies were laid in the ship and how people were transported, like they weren't human. And I think a part of me, because that's a part of my ancestral makeup, I don't believe that it wasn't necessarily healed, if that makes sense. It was almost like I could still feel that. I mean, there's times when I was in Utah where I did not feel safe. And it wasn't because somebody was threatening me or doing things, but there were things there were things that weren't healed. And I had a hard time with certain things. And so when it came to that particular piece, I really related on it. So I called it patterns because, history tends to repeat itself in ways. And oftentimes, as it repeats itself, it might look different. And so I literally made it into a pattern, and that's why I called it pattern. And again, they were laid in patterns. So there's like so many layers to that piece for patterns. That's why I did that. And then, so yeah, and then when it came to even the newest piece I created called So, it's kind of a series like based on that piece, and kind of, you sow what you reap, you reap what you sow. And America, it's kind of there's a lot of genocide and a lot of unfortunate things that went down as America was kind of created. and not just with African Americans, but natives and, and others. And so that's kind of where So came. And I didn't want to necessarily be like, oh, death of the flag or something, because that kind of doesn't allow for more of like the understanding of the layers to come through and the complexity. Because for me, when it came to that particular piece, I've always wanted to feel like I've always wanted to feel like I belonged here, but deep down, I never really have. I mean, every time the flag came up, there was a part of me that was just like, I can't pledge. I'm having a hard time pledging because of my history, the things that haven't been looked at and healed. And so anyway, I could talk a lot. Maybe that's why I don't talk a lot about these pieces, because I talk a lot about pieces. So did
Marlena,
that help?
yes, if I can interject just for a second and add that just for your piece Swept Under the Rug, you, I mean, very graciously accepted an award from Dialogue for that piece. And if I could just say that, obviously me knowing you from BYU and those BYU days, and often having that same face that you mentioned, that's, we're here. But I think, I mean, as important, in Dialogue, those are the voices that we amplify, that we try to make sure don't go unheard. And I think, I absolutely love the way that you have decided to take your art, right? Because I think it goes to who you are as well. Using the symbolism, I think it shows us, that's, even everyone here, we're trying to egg you on, tell us. It's not you, right? To say, even. And I think that's even an important part about other people's pain, at least for me, where we want to hear, but a lot of times we just need to sit back and think, and just think. And I really appreciate your art for that. I mean, personally, listening to Swept Under the Rug, at first I felt anger, then I felt scared, and then hopeful, and then thought, So those were my trains of thought as I went through that, and I'm sure everyone will have a different opinion and a different emotions from it. But for you as an artist, as as people either talk to you or communicate with you, the kind of feelings that they have, kind of how we think about the parables, right? I can imagine Christ. He shares his parable and he says, he says whatever he says, and several people come to him with all the different things they thought, and they're like, and he's just sitting there like, that's what you got? You didn't get the rest of this? Do you ever feel that way? Do you ever feel like, disappointed by the audience? I mean, you had that, terrible experience, that you couldn't even create art for a long time, don't know if Christ ever felt that way. He said, I'm done sharing, no one's listening. How do you ever feel that way? Have you gotten to a point where your art is for others? Is it less for you? Like how do those things, how does that kind of interplay and interconnect for you?
Yeah, so, that first time when I got that critique, that was the time where I was like, oh, dang, because I was like, look at this. And then I was so excited. And then I was like, oh, interesting. Shock art, really? So that was kind of the beginning. And honestly, that was the biggest thing, because I stopped making work for 4 years, and I decided, that's why I didn't get my BFA. I got my BA, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna teach art, and that's my role. And that's kind of, unfortunately, where I went when I kind of got that reaction. I think the hardest thing for me was actually like my BYU days, just because I had, obviously it's about you and what you think. It's more important how you feel about it. But at the same time, it would be nice if you had some recognition. I think the hard thing too is like when I did, granted, I don't want to assume anything because I could have been wrong, but because I was so fragile at that time, my senior show was in the bottom of the library, in an area that a lot of people couldn't see it. And I think that kind of, unfortunately, when I was still, like at the beginnings of my career, I just kind of took that as like, oh, not that good, maybe I should just teach art, And so that's kind of where that came from. But I will say now where I'm at, especially because I've had a lot of healing, I've had therapy, I went through a lot, and because I went through that, I don't really care, so I'll share a piece, and if people don't resonate with it, then that's fine. And that's kind of why, I love to use symbols, because it's like, oh, if someone doesn't understand it, like usually when I show, like when I've shared the flag, oh, they're like, oh, it's a flag, moving on, for those who didn't see the bodies. And so like, oh, okay, that's kind of, letting people kind of, I really think, where I'm kind of at this point where It's like, if people want to see it and they're ready, then great. If they're not, that's where they're at. And I respect people for where they're at. And that's kind of where I am now. And, you know, with the flag, that piece was a little bit more bold. I mean, granted, they all had their own images, but I think if people know what, you know, the symbols are, and they see the flag, they're like, oh, that piece, I definitely had people were not quite, there were people who resonated with it and they loved it. And there was other people that were like, that gave them a bad taste in their mouth because of how they felt about X, Y, and Z. And I'm at that point where that's fine, you know, but this is my truth and I'm going to share my truth. And those, you know, who it can resonate and that's for them, then that's awesome. Because I've had a lot of people come to me and they're just, you know, it's cool that they can resonate with it. And it's just like, they're like, Marlena, I felt the same way. Like, you know, there's something about art that provides a lot of layers. You know, sometimes when you just tell your story, it's easy for people to misunderstand. And that's why I think, again, the parables, or the idea of kind of, you know, using, like, trying to like model after Christ and using parables has been so beneficial for me. And being able to share my truth in a way that is totally, people can have their agency and choose to look into it. And then if they don't want to, that's great, move on. So that's kind of like how I've come. And so, like, just side note, like I made this piece this year or last year, can't remember, COVID, but the year's kind of like, but I'm now making more work. I'm in the process of making more portraits, and you'll see more work from me now. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
We have a lot of other questions in the chat and probably not enough time to get to all of them. Do any of our panelists want to raise just maybe one or maybe two more? And we should probably start to close things down. But any others that you want to really highlight here?
Oh, not me, right? You're talking about.
No, the other panelists. Yeah, we'll let them pick out which questions they want to highlight. Yeah, sorry, you're off the hook for a second.
I think if I could pick out one, here they asked, where do you hope LDS art goes in the future? Multicultural, multi-experiential. Does your faith experience have a place in the art community?
Yeah. So where I'm currently at, I'm not necessarily practicing, but at the same time, I do respect, you know, a lot of the ideas, and I still want to hold it with me. But I think, actually, can you repeat the question? I already like.
Yeah, it's pretty much. Does your faith experience have a place in the art community? Like how?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I think because of my upbringing, like it's always going to be a part of my work, and so like I think the biggest thing that I am interested in doing is showing different perspectives. You know, I've been talking with other artists and, you know, other female artists especially, and we talked about, I wonder what it would be like if, you know, in the Bible or the Book of Mormon or whatever, that they kind of shared the perspective of the women. What would that piece look like? What would certain scriptures or certain ideals look like in the perspective of women? You know, and just kind of sharing different perspectives, kind of bringing more, you know, depth to some of these stories. And so those are some things that, you know, I've been wanting to kind of look at, and even, you know, looking at the creation and just sharing a different perspective, and just because there's so much more, I think, to a lot of these ideas, because yes, you know, words are beautiful, poetry, beautiful, but sometimes it doesn't always share the whole picture, you know? And I think that's an important thing. And again, these are just also, you know, as you create work, these are, you know, your perspectives. It's not necessarily, you know, what's going on, but I think there's something interesting when, you know, because we're all, you know, connected, you know, in some way. It's interesting to kind of see, you know, what other people think of when they hear certain things, and it kind of, oh, I never thought of that. You know, it kind of brings more and more depth to certain things. So yeah. And
if you could make a quick mention of your solo show coming up.
Oh, well, this was like figured out like yesterday, but yeah, I'll be doing a solo show next year, I think around March time, or something. And again, too, if anyone has any more questions, you can email me at marlenawilding@gmail.com. Like, I don't mind answering more questions. In fact, I would prefer if, like, especially with that comment about someone said, you know, hey, like, I saw this piece and it kind of it was traumatic for me. Please email me and I would love to talk to you one-on-one. And I actually prefer that than kind of sharing my thoughts and feelings to everyone. And I think that's kind of like, I'd rather talk to you personally to share, you know, to express than share. So yeah.
Marlena, what a wonderful hour that we've gotten to spend with you and hear so many fascinating stories and see your own evolution as an artist and to hear all of these, the backstories behind so many of these powerful pieces. It was really a pleasure. So thank you so much for your time tonight.
You're welcome.
Our benediction is offered by Esther Kendari, who has a BFA from BYU Hawaii, an MFA from Liberty University, and has studied at the New York Academy of Art and interned with Joseph Bricky. Her work has been exhibited, purchased, and published in cities across the country, including New York, Chicago, Salt Lake City, and San Francisco. She currently lives in Utah County with her husband, Stephen Christiansen, and an ever-growing collection of miniature cacti. Esther.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this opportunity to gather as brothers, as sisters, as seekers of truth and beauty. We are grateful for the words and wisdom and vulnerability that Marlena has shared with us. Please bless that we can be able to carry them with us into our ongoing lives and to allow them to open our hearts and our minds to both the pain and the beauty around us, and that we can allow that to inform our decisions and deepen our empathy. We are grateful for the knowledge of heavenly parents who love us and a Savior who has sacrificed for us. Please help us to move forward in the hope and the strength of that knowledge and in the strength of the community that we build together. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. So, Marlena,